Since 2016, forces have been working in earnest to deprive you of the right to an opinion. They want to dictate your preferences. They want to get their way at all costs. Their work may be about to come to fruition. Dissatisfaction with Brexit, the election of Trump, and inaction on climate change has led some academics and activist groups to consider replacing democracy with another form of government, such as epistocracy, government by political experts. In his 2018 essay, Plural Voting for the 21st Century, Thomas Mulligan proposes a system in which, and I quote, "The voting authority develops a database which contains a list of voters. As citizens are franchised, they get added to the database. The database contains information about not only the elections in which voters participated, but also how they voted. For Clinton or Trump, remain in the EU or leave. After voters cast their ballots, two things happen. First, Q is run on the database to update competences. Second, the outcome of the election is decided, not by determining which alternative was more popular, but by weighting citizens' votes in the theoretically optimal matter, using the competences in the database." So what is Q? How is a voter's competence measured? Mulligan explains, it is possible to estimate a voter's competence, that is, estimate the probability that he will choose now correctly by comparing his voting record to the voting records of other citizens. Solely from this information, and without any objective knowledge of which past candidates and policies were the correct ones, we can determine for any individual voter and to a high precision how likely he is to choose correctly this time around. We do so through a process called Q. This is a deeply counterintuitive result. To develop a sense of it, consider what we might think of some voter, Smith, who participates in two hypothetical elections. In the first election, Smith votes for candidate A, but all of the other 120 million citizens vote for B. In the second election, Smith votes for A, along with 59,999,999 other voters, but B wins by a single vote. We would seem justified in taking a dim view of Smith's competence as a result of what we know about his choice in the first election and that election's overall result. There is, in accordance with the hypothesis, a truth of the matter about whether A or B is correct, and Smith's judgment was contradicted by the independent judgments of 120 million other people. In the second election, however, no such view is justified. Put in a similar way, and under a minimal assumption about voter competence, a sizable election which is decided almost unanimously is more likely to have been decided correctly than an election decided on a knife edge. This is directly implied by the classical Condorcet's jury theorem, and this information in turn tells us something about the competence of the voters involved. This is the idea driving Q. Mulligan acknowledges that his system would end the secret ballot, but notes that John Stuart Mill was dubious of the secret ballot on the grounds that voting is a public trust, and secrecy incentivises people to vote with an eye toward their own narrow interest, rather than the public good. Losers' consent is necessary for a functioning democracy. That is to say, those who don't get their way in an election or referendum must be willing to abide by the decision of the majority. Mulligan, who is clearly unhappy with the result of the 2016 US presidential election, is proposing a system in which he hopes never again to have to give losers' consent. There are 5 observations I would like to make about Mulligan's proposed system. First, there are obvious privacy concerns. If the electoral database was ever hacked, voting histories could be used for blackmail and to ruin reputations and manipulate elections. Second, the system would be open to abuse. Someone could vote according to the outcome predicted by polls in order to boost their competence rating. Third, it is unfair to devalue an individual's future subjective preferences simply because the majority currently has a different subjective preference. Fourth, as far as I'm aware, Mulligan has not considered the impact of tactical voting on competence. And fifth, I would not want my competence judged by the incompetence of the majority. In short, Mulligan's proposal is an elaborate ad populum or appeal to the majority argument. Another academic who would like to rig elections and referenda to deliver his desired outcomes is Georgetown University political philosopher Jason Brennan, author of the controversial book Against Democracy. In a 2018 interview with Vox, Brennan said, "Here's what I propose we do. Everyone can vote, even children. No one gets excluded. But when you vote, you do three things. First, you tell us what you want. You cast your vote for a politician or for a party, or you take a position on a referendum. Second, you tell us who you are. We get your demographic information, which is anonymously coded, because that stuff affects how you vote and what you support. And the third thing you do is take a quiz of very basic political knowledge. When we have those three bits of information, we can then statistically estimate what the public would have wanted if it was fully informed." Brennan belittles those whose opinions differ from his, implying that they're ill-informed. He appears to deny that two minds could comprehend the same facts, yet reach different conclusions. Brennan would like the votes of those who, according to their demographic information, are more likely to share his views to be given greater weight. Environmental activist group Extinction Rebellion would like to circumvent the democratic process altogether by establishing a citizens' assembly. On their Our Demands page, they explain, "The Citizens' Assembly on Climate and Ecological Justice will bring together ordinary people to investigate, discuss and make recommendations on how to respond to the climate emergency. Similar to jury service, members will be randomly selected from across the country. The process will be designed to ensure that the Assembly reflects the whole country in terms of characteristics such as gender, age, ethnicity, education level and geography. Assembly members will learn about critical thinking before they hear balanced information from experts and those most affected by the emergency. Members will speak openly and honestly in small groups with the aid of professional facilitators. Together they will work through their differences and draft and vote on recommendations. The Citizens' Assembly will be run by non-governmental organisations under independent oversight. This is the fairest and most powerful way to cut through party politics. It will empower citizens to actually work together and take responsibility for our climate and ecological emergency." Why is Extinction Rebellion demanding a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice? Because this is an emergency. The challenges are big, wide-ranging and complex, and solutions are needed urgently. In other words, this is an all-encompassing crisis that requires an immediate radical solution. They continue, "Extinction Rebellion believes that part of the problem is the way electoral politics works. Political power in the UK is in the hands of a few elected politicians. Over the last 40 years, this system has proved incapable of making the long-term decisions needed to deal with the climate and ecological emergency. Politicians simply can't see past the last election. In truth, under the current system, the British government has proved capable of making long-term environmental policy decisions that in fact they have passed legislation to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. But there's no losers' consent from Extinction Rebellion. The government's not acting fast enough for their liking." They go on, "Here is how a citizens' assembly can break the deadlock. Citizens' assemblies are fair and transparent. Assembly members have an equal chance of being heard. Briefing materials, experts and other presenters are vetted by diverse stakeholders and shared publicly. In other words, dissenting views will be censored and stakeholders will control the information presented to Assembly members. This, they say, produces informed democratic decisions. Citizens' assemblies are especially useful when difficult trade-offs are necessary. For example, experts might propose policies for how to meet a 2025 target for net zero greenhouse gas emissions and the Assembly could decide which they prefer. They would also consider how to mitigate the impacts of change on the most vulnerable people. In other words, they know that their policies will cause economic devastation and require a rapid expansion of welfare and social programs that would probably not be achievable under the current system. Whereas Mulligan and Brennan promote epistocracy, Extinction Rebellion promotes something that could more accurately be called Scientocracy. Experts would propose purportedly science-based policies, and the Citizens' Assembly would rubber stamp what it decides are the best ones, preserving a veneer of democratic process. Apparently, however, the Assembly would not be free to choose a policy that would achieve net zero emissions by, say, 2030 or 2040, or to reject a net zero emissions target altogether. Now, with the coronavirus pandemic and the recent economic shutdown, which is perhaps comparable to the measures necessary to achieve net zero emissions in 5 years, we have had a taste of what it would be like to live in a scientocracy. Recent events have shown that government by scientists or in the name of science is a form of authoritarianism. The government cannot be questioned, criticised or opposed because its policies are ostensibly based on objective truth. The government knows what's best for the individual and for society, and so we have seen the encroachment of Big Brother and the nanny state in the form of social distancing restrictions that would seek to control an individual's every move. Voicing a contrary opinion is a threat to the common good, for individuals cannot be trusted to assess claims and determine the truth on their own. I'm a moderator of an anti-lockdown group on Facebook. A member posted a screenshot from the Health Department's privacy impact assessment of the COVID Safe app, with the final paragraph of page 44 circled. It reads, "The Australian government has also given clear indications that it will not be mandatory for any person to install or use the app. However, there may be a potential risk of circumstances in which a particular individual does feel pressured to download the app. For example, a supermarket insisting on customers showing that they are using the app before being permitted to enter the store, or an employer insisting that their employees demonstrate that they are using the app before being permitted to start or continue work." It's worth noting that this was posted before legislation to protect against these very abuses was passed. But even though this is from a government document publicly available on a government website, Facebook removed the post. Another member shared a Daily Mail article entitled, "Mouthwash could prevent COVID-19 transmission, scientists say." Anyone who read the article would know that it was not suggesting that drinking Listerine would cure COVID-19. It clearly states, "The study authors do not say that currently commercially available mouthwash prevents COVID-19, but that further research into mouthwash chemicals could be beneficial." Even though the article was based on a legitimate scientific study, Facebook fact-checkers flagged it as false. There is also news that Google has gone as far as to delete a copy of the pandemic trailer from a user's personal Google Drive account. Of course, Facebook and Google are private companies, not government agencies. No doubt Facebook and Google fear potential lawsuits if they are not proactive in censoring content that is critical of government policy or official medical advice. No doubt they also fear a public backlash if they fail to act on content reported by users. But I want to highlight that for an authoritarian regime to come to power, it relies on cooperation from business and private citizens. For a Scientocracy to come to power, it relies on a base of devoted followers, a cult of the expert. The idea that it is possible to govern and be governed based on undeniable, indisputable, objective fact is enticing. One could then trust the government and its expert advisors absolutely, because they would always be right. Policies would never fail. They would always deliver the desired outcomes. There would be no need for debate, because that would mean entertaining concepts that are at best suboptimal and at worst dangerous. This is utopian wishful thinking. Scientocracy is not founded on science but scientism, the belief that science will solve all of humanity's problems. Scientism fails to recognise the fact-value distinction and seeks to derive an ought from an is. Even if it is true that shutting down the economy and imposing social distancing measures will lower the transmission rate of COVID-19, it does not necessarily follow that this is what ought to be done. And if our scientocratic government must maintain the illusion of always being objectively correct, then it can never accept blame for its failures or for unforeseen consequences arising from its actions. The successful implementation of its policies must have been sabotaged by certain individuals or groups who will be scapegoated and persecuted, and we will see the rise of tyranny. Science is supposed to be about reducing uncertainty, yet in the face of uncertainty we are often forced to make decisions based on rules of thumb or subjective preferences. The lockdown and social distancing proponent will claim that these measures were necessary to save lives, yet why such extreme measures were justified to save lives from COVID-19 but not, say, tuberculosis or malaria is never explained. And it cannot be, because ultimately it is arbitrary and subjective. This is why the systems put forward by Mulligan, Brennan and Extinction Rebellion are absurd. Why should one person's arbitrary subjective preference be given more weight than another's? We need to acknowledge that scientists, even experts in the same field, don't always agree, and even when there is a consensus among them, they are sometimes wrong. There can be even greater disagreement among experts from different disciplines. A scientific expert can be considered an authority only in his field of specialisation. A doctor of medicine cannot give sound economic advice any more than an economist can give sound medical advice. This can be a problem when making complex decisions that have ramifications across multiple sectors of society. In respect to COVID-19, the only thing that's clear from the science is that the science is unclear. The novel coronavirus was first detected among humans only a few months ago. In that time, we have been told that the virus could not be transmitted from human to human. We have been told that it's possible to be reinfected with the virus. We have been told that it is not possible to be reinfected with the virus. We have been told that there is significant risk of contracting the virus through contact with infected surfaces. We have been told that there is minimal risk of contracting the virus through contact with infected surfaces. We were told that the lethality rate of COVID-19 is 3.4%. We have been told that the lethality rate of COVID-19 is 0.66% or 0.37% or lower, depending on the study. In other words, the lethality rate is uncertain, but it appears to be much lower than originally feared. And yet we have been asked to surrender our critical faculties and accept the word of medical experts as gospel. I am of the opinion that the government's overreaction to the pandemic is driven by the public's mass hysteria over the virus and moral panic over those who will not conform to the diktats of our medical overlords. I think it is playing into the hands of those who wish to abolish democracy. I think that the short-sighted decisions being made now will perpetuate the next big crisis, economic depression, and the short-sighted response to that will perpetuate the next big crisis, perhaps famine or hyperinflation, and so the public will be kept in a perpetual state of fear, always looking to the state for salvation, willingly surrendering more freedoms for the illusion of safety, and trusting more power to the government each time it fails them. I'm honestly not certain whether democracy is the best system of government. Democracy has its faults, but I see no reason to believe that scientists and other experts are inherently more virtuous and trustworthy than the average voter. Perhaps the best thing about democracy is not free and open elections, but the things that come along for the ride, such as the right to have an opinion and be able to express it, and to make important life decisions based on your preferences. Democracy does not guarantee that the best candidates will be elected. But if we give up our democracy, we give up the mechanism by which a corrupt, incompetent or overbearing government can be peaceably removed from power. I would like to leave you with two quotes. The first from French philosopher Albert Camus, who said, "The welfare of humanity is always the alibi of tyrants." And the second quote by C.S. Lewis expresses a similar sentiment. He wrote, "Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. Links to all sources can be found in the description box below. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll be bringing you another video soon.